Welcome to the Pro Guide Do-It-Yourself Home Improvement video series.
Building a house like this one is a complicated piece of construction. There's the foundation, the framing, the siding, the roofing, the flooring, and the electrical. In fact, everything we've covered in our series up till now, or will cover in future programs. Now, I'll bet you're thinking this all sounds quite complicated, but there is a building project that involves almost all these elements that 2 to 3 people can complete in a period of 6 to 10 weekends. I'm Kurt Burbick. In this special 2-part program, Avian Rogers and I are going to show you all of the steps involved in building your own garage. Admittedly, it's not a project for everyone, but the principles of framing that we'll be covering in this first part are the same for all home construction projects.
It sure looks like a big job, doesn't it? Well, it is. But the important thing to know is that it's made up of many small steps accomplished one at a time. In part 1 of this program, the main thing we'll deal with is the basic technique of framing, but we'll also deal with following local building codes, getting the right permits, pouring the concrete slab and preparing the design. We'll build the framing for the walls and the roof, and finally, we'll sheathe the roof. At the end of this part, we'll have a fully framed structure with a covered roof, which will act as a shelter for doing our finish work in part 2. In part 2, we'll install our windows and passage door, run our electrical lines. We'll shingle the roof and put up the siding. Then we'll install our garage door and electronic door opener. Kurt?
Before we go any further, let's take a look at the tools we'll need for this part. First, we'll need a couple of hammers, a measuring tape, at least 33 feet long, a combination square, a 4-foot-long level, a nail pulling tool, a staple gun, a circular saw, a chalk line or string, a couple of sturdy ladders, and some pencils. And this, of course, which is optional. Morning. Well, we're getting a nice early start on this first day of construction.
We've got everything we need. Tools, materials, plans, great weather.
At least for today, anyway.
Well, and for a project of this size, we thought we'd get a little extra help, too.
I guess. Good morning.
Yeah.
Good morning, Avian.
Hey, Ron.
Hi, Ron.
Well, obviously, you can still use an extra hand.
You bet.
Are you sure you shouldn't have someone down here with a little bit more experience?
Not at all. This kind of a project just requires preparation, some common sense, and the willingness to do a little hard work.
Ron, this weekend we're working on framing. We're building the walls and the roof to our garage.
These pieces are called studs, and the long pieces we've cut are the plates. Each wall has a top and a bottom plate.
What do they do?
Well, they form the bottom and the top of the wall. I think it'll become more clear when we start building the walls.
I see. Okay. Sure.
We'll work right here. See, the nice thing about building a garage is the concrete slab creates the perfect work surface.
You know, before we go any further, maybe we should stop and take a look at the steps that got us to this point. Why don't we go in the house?
Good idea.
Okay.
The first thing we did, Ron, was to check with the city about the kind of permits we'd need and the kind of codes we'd have to follow in planning our project. We actually had to get a variance to place the garage out there.
The next thing we needed to do, Ron, was choose a design. There's a wide assortment of plans and blueprints available at home centers and building supply stores, and they can be a real nice aid to doing it yourself. Since there's a variety of styles and options, we chose one that matched closely the style of the house. Then we took the plans to an architect, and she made some minor changes in the roof design so they matched the house exactly. So we got the economy of a pre-done plan while tailoring it to our specific needs.
Next came the pouring of our concrete slab, so we had to find a contractor. These things want to be on 12-inch centers, not 16.
Well, so we'll start with this wall, though.
Sure. Yeah.
There we go. See, we want to line the stud up with these marks at the top and bottom plates like this.
Right, but how did you know where to make these marks?
Well, before you got here this morning, Ron, Kurt and I laid out the top and bottom plates and made our marks. We measured in and made a mark exactly 3/4 of an inch from the edge. Then we moved the end of the tape and put it on that mark, and we measured and marked at 16-inch intervals along both plates. Then we put an X on the side of the marks where our studs are going to go.
All right, I've got all that, but I'm not quite sure why we have this 16-inch spacing.
Okay, Ron, the reason for the 16-inch spacing is so that the studs will be in the right position when we nail on the sheathing. See, each sheet is 4 feet wide, and it's very important that the edge of each sheet center on a stud, so that when we nail 2 sheets side by side, each edge will have something to nail into. Come on down here and let me talk about the 3/4 inch space at the end. The reason that we started out with a 3/4 inch space before we started laying out our 16-inch spacing is so that the studs would be properly aligned for the sheathing.
Now, local codes will specify the maximum allowable distance between the studs, and some codes will allow 24-inch on center, but most require 16-inch centers.
Now, these 3 stud corners, as they're called, have to do with providing nailing for finished materials on the inside of the garage. But Avian's going to explain more about that later.
All right, good.
Now, these are pre-cut studs. You can buy these at any lumber yard. They're already cut to the proper height for standard height walls, and they're a great convenience. Now, you cut your plates and your other pieces from dimensions on your blueprints. And when cutting your plates, be sure to select the material from the straightest lumber. And when you do that, sight down the board so you can place the crown or the bow up.
Okay, now that we've got the wall laid out on the horizontal, the next step is to nail it together using 2 16-penny nails at each joint.
Okay, that sounds easy enough.
You guys mind if I find a little music we can work to?
Nice choice of music, Kurt.
Thank you. Now, before we can lift this wall into place, we have to check it for squareness. We measured the diagonal of our wall from one corner to the other. Now we're measuring this diagonal, and we've discovered that the dimension is the same, so we know that our wall is square.
Then we nail a temporary 2x4 brace across the wall on a diagonal, and we're ready to raise the wall.
Is this all we need, just one brace?
Yes, this is enough of a brace to keep it square until we can raise it.
Let's see.
All right, let's put her up.
All right.
Okay, you got it, Ron?
Got it.
All right, now while Avian makes sure the wall is plumb or perfectly vertical, I'll nail this temporary brace in place.
See, and we don't ever have to remove any of the braces until we have all the walls up and plumb.
Okay, has that got it?
Looks good.
There's one wall up.
Well, that wasn't so hard. Only 3 more walls to go.
Sounds like you know what we're doing. Let's keep rolling.
We've got our 16-inch spacing already laid out on our plates, but look, we're going to have a new procedure coming here.
Well, it looks like we have to frame for a door. How do we handle that?
Well, take a look at your plans and find the dimension from the edge of the wall to the center line of the door. See here it says 3 foot 6 inches?
I see. Then we measure in from the edge and we make a mark.
Right. Let's mark the center line on our plate. Then all we'll need is our rough opening dimension.
Wait a minute. What is a rough opening?
Well, that's a dimension that indicates the location of the framing members so that when we frame this wall up, we'll have an opening big enough to accept our door unit. And that dimension is normally about 2 inches bigger than our door size.
How do we find out that size?
You get it from the door manufacturer. Then you take half the rough opening width and mark it on your plates. Then you mark your line, putting a double X on the outside of that line, which indicates the location of the double king studs, so that when we frame this wall, we'll have an opening width large enough to accept the door size.
Okay.
These two double sets of studs are our king studs. They define our door's rough opening width. We've nailed them into place on the plates where we just made our marks. Now I'm measuring and marking the rough opening height of the door. And for most doors, that's a standard 6 foot 10 inches above the slab.
Kurt, you mind if I choose the music this time?
Hey, Avian, great choice of music.
Thanks, Kurt.
What is this for?
Well, across the top of this door opening, we'll install this thing you built called a header. It's made up of the two 2x6s with a 1/2-inch plywood spacer in the middle.
Why the spacer?
Well, that's so the header will be the same thickness as the 2x4 studs.
Oh, I see. You know, most of this is just plain common sense.
Right. See, then we take these metal fasteners to attach the header, bring that down here, to the king studs. Then we take our metal fastener, wraps around the king stud, place it on our marks, and then slide the header into the saddle of the fastener. Great. Now we'll nail it all together. I've got some special nails. Let me give them to you, Ron. There you go.
Thank you.
Nail into all these holes here in the fasteners.
What I did was measure the distance between the header and the top plate so I could cut these cripple studs and toenail them into place.
What do you mean, toenail?
Well, that simply means putting the nail in at an angle like this. That's it.
Does that mean we can raise the wall now?
We might as well. Avian, can we have a little music? These foundation anchors, which we put in every 5 feet around our building, literally hold the building to the concrete slab. They're really easy to work with. You just fold these metal straps on top of the sole plate and nail them in. No drilling or wrenches are required, as with the old anchor bolt system.
Now the way we fasten our walls together is we drive several nails into the stud end of this wall into the corner of this wall. Now remember our 3-stud corner? We had 2 full-length studs with 2x4 spacers in between. The reason we do that is should we ever decide to finish the interior of our garage, we'll need something to nail the edge of our sheetrock into right here in the corner.
We're in the middle of framing up our 3rd wall. It'll be different than the first 2 walls in that it has 2 windows and no doors. But the process for framing is just the same. That is, you begin by cutting and marking your top and your bottom plates for the 16 inches on center stud spacing. Then you lay your plates on the slab and you locate and nail in your pre-cut studs, as we've done here. Now we've left 2 large spaces for our 2 window locations. And the way you locate the window is the same way you locate the door. That is, you measure over from the edge of the wall to the center line of the window location. Then you measure each way from that to the rough opening width of your window, and that will locate your 2 sets of double king studs on each side, here and over here. When they're nailed in place, you can install your window header. It's made the same way as a door header, and it's located in the same position, 6 foot 10 inches from the slab. Now, the window header is held in place with metal connectors, just like we used for the door header, and they'll hook the header to the double king studs. When they're nailed up, you put the smaller cripple studs at the top like this. Now, when that's in position, you can measure down from your window header to locate your window sill, which is a single 2x4. It goes in horizontally and is held in place again with a couple of metal connectors like these. Then, when that's nailed in place, we'll fill in the space at the bottom with 2 short cripple studs. And that's all there is really to framing up a window. Well, I guess we're ready to nail the stuff in place.
Framing the opening for our garage door took a little more thought than framing our other walls. Because we've got such a long span, we need a very large header to support the weight of the building. Basically, the wider the opening, the bigger the header. Well, one problem is our header is so tall that we don't have room for a top plate. Also, if we frame the wall on the horizontal concrete slab, it would be too heavy to raise in the typical way. So what we did is we built the 2 ends separately, adding these support studs or trimmers to hold the weight of the header. We've got this one nailed into place, and Ron's nailing this one in over here in the same way that we joined all the other walls. How's it going, Ron?
Just about got it, Avian.
Good. Well, once he's got this buttoned down, then we're ready to hoist the header into position, lifting one end at a time.
Now that we've got this end of the beam up, I've tapped in these temporary cleats to hold it in place before we try lifting the other end. This, by the way, is a special pressure-treated header called a laminated wood beam. It's made for extra long spans like a garage door, and you can get them in any lumber yard.
Notice how the header is cut longer than the size of our rough opening so that it sits on top of our trimmer studs. You know, there's nothing more frustrating than cutting your header the size of the rough opening, lifting into place, only to find that it's too short. But that's a common mistake. Well, now that we've got the walls up, we're ready to put on the cap plate. Ron? The cap plate goes on top of the top plate, all the way around the building. The important thing about the cap plate is that you overlap the joints at the corners, and this will aid in the overall stability of your building.
We've plumbed this last wall and added our temporary brace.
Well, this ought to do it for our first weekend.
Boy, where did all the time go? And doesn't this look great? Did we really do all this?
Not bad for one weekend.
No kidding.
Well, Kurt, we should take this plastic and cover up our materials so they stay nice and dry until next weekend.
Right. Ron, thanks a lot for your help.
Oh, don't mention it, Kurt. I'll see you next weekend.
Thanks, Ron. So
Bye now.
long. Oh, hey, Ron.
Hi.
Hi, Avian. Hi, Kurt. What are we going to do this weekend?
Well, we're going to install the roof framing and sheathing.
Hey, that sounds hard.
Yeah, and it would be, Ron, if we had to cut and assemble our own trusses. But fortunately for do-it-yourselfers, there are some other options that make it easier. These are called prefabricated roof trusses, and most lumber yards and material supply centers have them in standard sizes for garage roofs. It so happens that our garage roof isn't a standard design, so we had these made to order. What we'll be building is called a hip roof, and while there are lots of styles we could have chosen, we wanted one that would match our house.
I see.
And Ron, it's a principle that's carried even further in something called the pre-cut garage kit, which is relatively new in the home building scene. The idea is that the do-it-yourselfer can buy all of the materials for the garage in one package. The studs, the top and bottom plate, the rafters and gables and so on are all precision cut at the factory. It's an option that lies somewhere between having somebody build the garage for you and doing it yourself from scratch.
The first thing we needed to do was measure and mark the location of our trusses. We use the same principle we use in laying out our walls. One difference is the trusses are on 24-inch centers though, rather than 16. Now the design of our roof is called a hip roof, which means the ends slope just like the sides do. We want to make sure that the hips are even at both ends. So in doing our layout, we start at the center and measure out. Now we're just putting up the last of the rafter ties here, and they go right at the marks. And once they're all in place, then we simply slide the trusses into the slot that this creates. This is my last one, and we'll be ready to go.
All right, we want to get our first truss in place. What we want to do is get this end up on the double top plate.
I gotta clear this end. Okay.
Can you lift that up there?
Okay, well, over one more. Yeah, there we go.
Okay, push the point up.
Great. Okay.
All right. Lift it in.
Okay. Great.
Ron, you know, it's important to get these first two full trusses, called common trusses, absolutely plumb, because they're going to set the tone for the shape of the rest of the roof. All right, we're ready for that next truss.
Okay.
Ron, maybe you can give her a hand there. Sure.
I've got it in here. If you raise that up, that'd be great. And I'll tack it in down here. Okay, now we can toenail it in up there and over here.
Right.
After we got the full-length common trusses into place, we added this hip ridge and finished off our whole roof system. So now we're ready to put up the roof sheathing. Okay, guys. Now I'll grab it as soon as you get it up here far enough.
Okay, got it?
Okay, good, yeah. Be careful now. Okay, now we need to move it over, right over this rafter. Well, now we're starting to install the second course of our sheathing, and we added this 2x4 ledger for safety. And I'm tacking in these little plywood clips along the horizontal edge to give us more support when we don't have any wood. Okay, so let's slide this in, Ron. Over a little bit. Good, good. Now another thing that's important when installing 4x8 sheathing is to stagger your joints. We've got a joint here and a joint over here, so we never have a continuous line running all the way up a rafter, which will add to the strength of your roof system.
I'll use this snap line to make a chalk mark on my sheathing so I can cut off the loose ends of this paneling. I'll start down here at the edge of the roof, work up the line all the way to the peak. Using my circular saw, setting the blade to the proper depth, and remembering to wear my safety goggles. I'll also use these toe boards for safety as I climb up the roof.
This is the last step of this phase of our garage building project. What I'm doing is I'm stapling roofing felt to the sheathing of our roof. The roofing felt acts as a weatherproof skin underneath the shingles we'll be putting on later. I'm rolling it out as smoothly as I can where I started at the bottom. With each consecutive course, I'm sure to overlap the edges until the entire roof is covered.
Just made it, huh?
Boy, no kidding.
I just used these strips of lath to tack down the seams in the roofing felt. Now it won't get blown away before next weekend.
Great. Well, that's part one. Now we've got a sturdy shelter to store our materials under until we do the finishing work in part two.
And we're nice and covered up, so in case it starts to rain like it is now, we won't be in any trouble.
Well, I better make it home before it gets worse.
Hey, Ron, thanks a lot for all your help.
Yeah, thanks a million.
Enjoyed it. See you next weekend.
Great.
Right.
Goodbye.
In this part of our garage program, we're going to cover everything it takes to finish our garage. We'll put up the siding, run the electrical lines from the house to the garage, shingle the roof, install our windows and passage door. We'll have the garage door installed and the garage itself painted. But the special focus of this part of our program will be on one of the most popular of all do-it-yourself projects, installing your own electronic garage door opener. Now Kurt's going to talk about the tools that we'll be needing.
Generally, we'll need a couple of hammers, a measuring tape at least 33 feet long and one 16 to 20 feet long, a combination square, a level at least 4 feet long, a set of screwdrivers, a circular saw, a chalk line or string, a sturdy ladder or two, a couple of sawhorses, and some pencils. Here, Avian, catch.
What's this?
That's a piece of 1x2. We're going to need that later in the show.
If you say so. The materials that we'll be needing for this part of the program are sheets of 4x8 sheathing, smooth plywood for the soffit, composition shingles, some 1x6 for the fascia, crown molding, felt paper, trim at the soffit, the overhead door trim, 2 double-hung sash windows, and a pre-hung door, 4-penny, 6-penny, 8-penny, and 16-penny galvanized nails. These are the materials we need to build our garage. Your needs will be somewhat different depending on the details of yours.
Good morning.
Hey,
Hi,
Ron.
This weekend it's my turn to bring over the coffee.
Well, thank
Great.
you. How nice.
What are we going to do today?
The first thing we're going to do is we're going to put up this wall sheathing over the open frames.
All right.
It's very much like paneling or drywall, which we've covered in other programs.
Ron, why don't you give me a hand with this sheet of
Sure.
sheathing? Let's move it over. Great. When starting to hang sheathing, you want to start in the same corner you measured out from when locating the studs. Our studs are 16 inches on center, which is standard, so that we know at every 48 inches, or 4 feet, which is the same width as this sheet, there's a stud. In this way, the edge of the sheathing falls over the center line of the stud, so we always have something to nail to. Now, we put these starter nails right here so that when Ron and I lift our sheet into position, we can quickly tack it in and maintain that position. Now, let's raise it up. Okay. How's it look on your end?
Looks good.
Now, before we tack it in, I'm going to make one quick check to see whether it's plumb. And it looks very good. Okay, you got your hammer? Let's
Got it.
tack it in.
Okay, now let's get it tied up against that other edge.
All right, from the bottom.
Okay?
All right.
All right, now you press this up tight against the studs. I'll go in the inside and mark the window opening with my pencil. Then with my circular saw, I can just follow that pencil line and cut out the window shape. Bring it down a little bit here on this.
Oh, I
okay,
see.
let me
All
get one in.
Avian, what do we do about this crooked stud?
Oh, that's easy, Ron. Let me show you. I'm going to take this nail and tack it into the edge of the sheathing like this. Now if you'd push against that stud until it lines up, that looks good.
Sure.
Okay.
Okay.
And that ought to hold it.
Good.
Ron, another important thing about nailing the sheathing is the nail should be spaced 6 inches along the edges and 12 inches on the middle studs.
Okay.
As with the roof, we're covering up the sheathing with this building paper. It acts as a waterproof membrane. It goes on first before the windows and doors get installed, and as you can see, you start at the bottom working up. You want to have an overlap here at the edges of about 2 inches. You can just hold the stuff on the siding with some staples. That works fine.
Okay, you guys, we're ready to install the windows.
That sounds even more complicated.
No, it's not complicated at all. We did the hard part when we built the framing. But before the development of these pre-hung windows, it used to be hard. But now with these recent developments, a novice do-it-yourselfer can do it. See, they're fully self-contained. It comes with the jamb, of course, the glass and the windows, even the trim. And they come in a variety of sizes. So since our opening is finished, we just lift this whole unit up into position. Great. Oh, Mr. Kurt, you want to check for level?
Right. Well, this is right on.
Oh,
it's perfectly
great.
level. If it
Great.
wasn't, we'd probably take a shim like this to get it level on one side or the other.
Okay, well, the next thing to do is to put up the felt paper weatherproofing. So let's pull it out just a little bit. Whoop, scared me there for a second. You got it?
Yeah.
Okay, then we take this strip of tar paper and stick it up underneath. Make sure that it gets up, that it's touching the sill there. Now another thing to take note of is to put your factory edge up against your window. So we've got the bottom piece on first. Next piece that goes on are the sides so that it overlaps this bottom piece back behind the trim. Okay. We'll staple this into place. And then after Ron gets this side in, the last piece will go across the top, overlapping these flaps. Well, that's the last nail. We had pre-drilled the hole so the nails went in pretty smoothly. We finished putting up the tar paper. Then once we put up the finished siding, we'll caulk around that joint between the trim and the siding itself. So now we need to go put in the door, and that about does it for the window.
While we were framing this wall and tilting it into place, it was important to leave this sole plate in to give the wall strength. But now that the wall's been strapped to the foundation and we're ready to install the door, we need to cut out this section of sole plate. Now we need to check the slab for levelness. It looks pretty good.
Got it?
Yep.
Let's put the bottom in first. Great. Beautiful. Kurt, you want to remove the hinge pins and we'll take the door off.
Yeah.
Okay, we want to get it all the way up against there.
Okay.
That's good.
You got it?
Get it at the top. Okay, I'll hold it in while you staple. There we go.
Now that this door has been plumbed and securely fastened into place, we're ready to begin installing our door hardware. I'll put this doorknob in the pre-drilled hole and screw it together with the parts from the other side. For extra security, we want to install a deadbolt. Now we ordered the door with these holes pre-drilled, which makes this part of the job quite easy.
I think that's about as far as we're going to get this weekend.
We sure got a lot done.
Yeah, the building still looks a little strange, but we got the sheathing up and the felt paper and installed the windows and doors. Not bad for a barn raising.
Right, and I've learned a lot, and it's been fun, too.
Are you going to be back next weekend?
You bet I am.
Great.
Great. Well, thanks for your help. We'll see
Glad
you
to
then,
do it.
huh?
See you later.
Well, that's an interesting calling card. You're back.
Thought I'd give it another try this weekend, or at least until we're finished with this thing. What are you doing?
Well, I'm running the electrical line from the house to the garage, and I'm using a special kind of wire designed to be laid underground. It's got a special casing on it rather than the regular non-metallic casing. Now, code requires that the wire be buried at least 1 foot below grade. For any of these exposed areas, like this vertical run up the wall of the garage, we encase in conduit. Now, if you didn't notice, I also had to jump ahead and we put up a piece of siding so that we could drill our hole into the garage for the conduit.
Oh, I see. Where's Kurt?
Well, he happens to be on the other end of this cable in there.
In our separate electrical show, we went into greater detail on how to install a circuit breaker switch and electrical circuits in your home. What we've done in our garage is to bring a 20-amp circuit here, and that'll more than cover our electrical needs, including our overhead garage door opener. Now, we've already installed 2 electrical boxes here by nailing them into these studs. And remember, when you're putting in an outlet in a garage, it has to be what's called ground fault interrupted. We've also put in an outlet box overhead for our garage door opener here and an overhead light. Now, in a garage where the walls aren't covered up with finished materials to protect the wiring, you run the wiring in a somewhat different way than you would in the house. We run it up in the rafter area and bring it down the walls only where we need to the individual boxes. In this case, we had to notch our double top plate for the wires to fit. And that's where we'll use this metal safety plate to cover up and protect the wires. So when you've got your wiring to this point, that is the rough wiring completed, it's time to call in an electrical inspector and let him take a look. Before we start shingling, there's some details we need to take care of here at our roof overhang. We want our garage roof to match the design of the roof of the house. To do that, we need to apply a flat soffit to the underside of this overhang. We do that by snapping a chalk line all the way around the building, which corresponds to the height of these rafter tails. That'll be a guide for nailing on our 1x4 ledger. Then we can nail 2x4s from the rafter tail, which will toe nail into the 1x4 ledger, creating framing at 24 inches on center, just like our roof rafters, so that we can nail plywood up, creating our soffit. Then after a fascia and crown molding detail that Avian will explain in just a minute, we'll be ready to start shingling. This is a sheet of exterior finished plywood, just like we're going to put on the sides of the garage. We're going to nail it into this framing that we've installed with these 6-penny galvanized nails. Okay, Ron, I think we can do it.
We're putting up the fascia board right now. Fascia board is usually a 1x or 2x6 board, which does a couple of things. It acts as a kind of trim along the edge of our roof line, but functionally it serves to seal up the end grain of our rafter tails, which otherwise are highly susceptible to water absorption. And this kind of water absorption can cause severe rotting of the rafters. Our roof detail calls for a molding like this on top of our fascia. Now, it's important when installing a fascia or a molding that it line up smoothly with the slope of our roof. The way to determine that is to place a straight edge like this combination square along the line of the roof and bring that molding up to meet it. So in that way, when we apply our roofing shingles, they'll extend slightly over like that, and we'll get good continuous drainage overall. We're just about ready to put our siding up, but before we do that, we're adding this drip cap flashing over our windows and doors. This will encourage the water to drain away from the openings. Now, once we put our siding up, it'll cover up this flange and barely show. in. In this phase of our building, we're putting the siding up now.
We're applying a kind of siding known as board and batten.
So it'll look like the house, right?
Exactly.
Other typical kinds of siding that you might use are stucco, shingles, or full sheets of plywood.
But board and batten siding has a very pleasant appearance. We're not using the classic style of board and batten with solid wood vertical boards. We're using these sheets of plywood. Now we have to be careful in this case that the seams of these finished sheets don't line up over the seams of the sheathing underneath.
After we have our plywood put up, then we put the vertical battens 12 inches on center, matching the house using 4-penny galvanized nails.
Well, that really looks good.
Now we're going to show you something that's become available to the do-it-yourselfer. It's called a pneumatic nailing gun, and it simplifies any nailing project. It's powered by an air compressor, and this flexible line allows you to reach any part of the project. We like it especially because it makes the larger nailing jobs quick and easy, like putting sheathing on the walls and the roof, or putting up this paneling. For the paneling, we're going to use a framing gun. For the battens, we'll use a finish gun. Here, let me show you how easy it is. All right, let's do this thing.
Good safety practices should never be taken for granted. As you can tell, using a pneumatic nail gun isn't difficult, but always wear your safety glasses and read the instructions in the owner's manual for safety. Okay, that looks good. Okay, Ron, now let's tack it into place. Okay, good. Okay, now I'll take the pneumatic gun. Watch out. Well, I think we're going to call the weekend. It's getting late.
Maybe it's just me, but it seems like we got a lot done this weekend.
Oh, you're right. I think you're really picking this stuff up fast. You've been a terrific help, Ron.
You'll be back next weekend?
You bet I am. Looking
Great.
forward to it. See you later.
Take it
See
easy.
ya. Thanks a lot.
Goodbye.
We're installing our composition shingle roof. We begin with this starter roll piece. It's simply a continuous roll of composition shingle material. You position it here at the lower edge of the roof so it overhangs the fascia by 3/4 of an inch. That way the rainwater will drip free from the building materials. Start at one end of the roof and roll this piece out all the way to the other end, fastening it about every 12 inches here at the top edge. Once this piece is in place, you can begin installing your individual shingles.
Once we lay our starter row, we're ready to apply our shingles. Now we place our shingle at the bottom directly on top of the starter row, so we'll end up with a double layer of roofing material. We place it near the middle. Then we run a chalk line up the edge of one side of the shingle all the way up the roof. Then we snap another chalk line parallel to the first, extending from this small cut mark at the top of each tile. This line becomes the guideline for our next shingle. In this way, we'll get an alternating tab pattern across the roof. Then we use the top of these cut marks as a guideline to lay the edge of each tile above. Okay, that looks good. Now, Ron, do you have the nail gun down there?
Sure do. Here you are.
Thank you. We've got a lot of shingles to lay here, so I'm going to turn some music on to keep us company. outside shingles here, we need to keep them free so that we'll be able to slide the shingle underneath later on. At the end of this, each shingle should have 4 nails nailed about 1 inch above the cut mark for the tab. These black marks here are called wind tabs, and in a few days they'll melt so that these flaps or these tabs will stay down.
Now that we've got the shingles on the 4 sloped faces of our roof, we can begin completing the job by applying these ridge shingles. A ridge shingle is 1/3 of a full 3-tab shingle, and we just use our utility knife and trim these pieces out of these larger shingles. Now you start at the bottom of the roof, working your way up by snapping first a chalk line along here to give you proper alignment. And you apply the shingles one on top of the other one so that you will cover up the 2 nail heads that you put in the previous shingle, like this. Fold them evenly over, align it with a chalk line, and nail them in. Then when you've reached the ridge and completed that, that'll be the final step toward making your roof waterproof. And if you've done the installation properly, a roof like this should give you 25 to 30 years of life before it needs replacement.
Boy, let me tell you something. That was a little bit like work.
Well, we figured doing the roofing was going to take a little bit of time.
The next job we've got to do is going to take a little time too. But the best part about that is we get to watch mostly.
What do you mean?
Well, we get the garage door installed, but all we have to do is put up a little trim.
Well, let's see how this brick molding fits.
That looks pretty good.
Yeah, that's good.
Well, either you guys got an early start or I'm late. How are you?
Fine. Yeah, we did get an early start in putting in this garage door opening. This jamb is a 1x4, and we shimmed and plumbed it in place, much like we did with the passage door installation. Then the header's a 1x4 trim piece. And now to finish this out, we'll install this piece of brick molding. And the dimensions for this are really critical, and it's a good time to be checking your plans to pick up those pieces of information. You know, we have to finish out this garage door opening before the garage door contractor can begin his work.
Contractor? We aren't going to do this ourselves?
Right. It's not that complex a task, but it should be done carefully. There is an element of danger if you don't know exactly what you're doing. So for safety, we went with a contractor to install our large, heavy garage door. Besides, after putting up the garage, we needed a break.
It's very important that the tracks on each side of the door are parallel from top to bottom.
When the last panel's in place, he can put in the overhead sections of the track.
He attached the overhead sections of the track to the vertical sections, and he was done.
Hey.
Contractor! Oh, Tom, we really enjoyed your performance, really enjoyed it. Hey, we got to get started painting this thing now.
Sure do.
Painting a garage can take some time. We started with a primer coat, and now we're putting on our finished color coat. And when we're done with this, we're going to tackle one of the most popular do-it-yourself projects, installing an overhead garage door opener.
Now we're ready to install our electronic garage door opener. Even if you're not going to build your own garage, this is definitely a project you should consider doing yourself.
Besides being an incredible convenience, an automatic garage door opener can make your garage safer and more secure. Some things to look for when you're choosing your opener are automatic lights, an emergency disconnect cord, digital radio controls that allow you to set your own security code, a light switch that operates the light separate from the opener, an LED light on your transmitter to tell you if your batteries are good, a chain drive trolley control, a special protection control system that stops the garage door from closing automatically in case anything gets in the way.
And also an owner's manual to help you in assembling and installing your garage door opener.
I'm putting together a unit called the T-rail. It's the track along which the trolley will slide.
And this is the trolley. It slides along the T-rail smoothly, pulling the door arm, opening and closing the door, like this.
After we add the chain drive, we're ready to install the opener.
Before we did anything, we checked the balance of the doors and disengaged the locks. Then we found the center point of our door to attach our door bracket. Our door bracket runs even with the top roller. And we use security bolts that run all the way through the door. Then we're ready to install our header bracket. Our header bracket also runs at the center line, but the height is determined by finding the high arc point. So we raise the door and run a level across the top to find that point. Then we'll install our header bracket about 1 inch above that point. If you rest that carefully, then we can line it up.
All right.
That looks good.
Has that got it?
Yeah. Now we're ready to slip the T-rail into the header bracket, and we'll use this pin to hold it in place by sliding it into the corresponding holes. All right, here we go.
Next, we position this opener assembly by setting it on this 2x4 block on top of the garage door, using the center line as a guide. Now we need to bolt our power head to the truss. To do that, we use these metal brackets that we measured and cut. They simply bolt to the slotted tab, and they lag screw into the wooden truss.
I'm setting the up and down limits of the door now. I just set the force adjustment. The force adjustment is a mechanism that in case the door should hit an object unexpectedly, it would cause the door to reverse its direction if it were closing or stop if it were opening. Now what I'm doing is adding the final link to our garage door opener system. I'm adding the straight arm to the wedge here with a couple of bolts.
Now we're ready to plug the unit in. It's just that simple.
Installing the wall control panel is a snap by simply following the color-coded connections. Run your wires neatly up the wall through the rafters for a tidy wiring job. Then all that remains to do is simply screw it to the wall and we'll check it out. In case of a power failure, this special handle will allow you to operate the door manually. To re-engage it, all you need to do is push the wall control button.
An optional safety feature with garage door openers is an electric eye. Here, I'll demonstrate by breaking the ray of light with my hand.
Hey, watch out, Ron!
Well, that was close.
Well, it obviously works.
Well, I'm all done painting.
Right. Avon, you got that 1x2 I gave you earlier in the show.
Oh, you must mean this one.
Yeah, I want to show you another safety feature.
What's that for?
Well, when a garage door drops on something that's sitting in the opening, we don't want the door to crush the object. So what it does is it stops and goes back up. Here, I'll show you.
Hey.
Yay.
It's adjusted right.
Okay, what are we going to do next?
Nothing. We're all done. That's it.
Ron, thank you very much for all your help. In fact, listen, we've got something special planned for next weekend, and we were hoping that you and Judith could join us.
Oh, that's great. We'll be here as long as I can play with that garage door opener.
Great.
All right, great. Goodbye now.
Wonderful.
See you next weekend.
then.
Wonderful. I can't believe it really works. How long have you had this?
Well, we've had it for about a year.
We finally got a place to keep it.
And today we get to show it off at the rally. That's why we wanted you to wear the antique clothes. It's kind of a custom.
Well, I don't know what's more fascinating, this car or the new garage and the door opener.
The garage is, frankly. I spent the last 5 weekends working on it. And it's easy. Matter of fact, it's fun.
Yeah, it is fun if you do it right, and it can save you a little money.
It is fun if you have the right tools and a good plan, and you take your time.
And a little help from your neighbors doesn't hurt.
Ron, you know, you were wonderful, and you've come a long way in 5 weekends. You're well on your way to becoming a do-it-yourselfer yourself.
This is great, a whole new dimension to my old husband.
Well, now, just a
Now
minute.
that you've acquired all this new skill, Ron, I've got some great ideas for our next 5 weekends.
Now, how about you? We hope that you're well on your way to becoming a do-it-yourselfer. I'm Avian Rogers.
And I'm Kurt Burbick.
And we're off to an antique car rally.
But you get a chance to close the garage door, Ron.
From here.
All by yourself.